Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming out on what turned out to be quite a chilly day. And if you've been here for any amount of time, our guest probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but most recently he was known for the very critical report that was drawn up by the Diet regarding the Fukushima accident. That was the National Diet of Japan Fukushima Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Commission. In the report, he sharply criticized the regulators and the utilities, as well as others, saying the disaster was a profoundly man-made disaster that could and should have been foreseen and prevented. Today, he's coming to talk about his new book, looking at regulatory capture. And we were talking about the contents of the book earlier, and basically he's concerned that the lessons from Fukushima have not been fully learned and will not be applied in the future to future accidents or emergencies, and that what lessons were learned seem to be forgotten, or people are maybe conveniently forgetting some of the lessons from the disaster. Dr. Kurokawa is an MD and is currently an adjunct professor at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies and chairman of the the Health and Global Policy Institute, and chairman of the Global Health Innovative Technology Fund, and is also a professor emeritus at the University of Tokyo. Anyway, without any further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Kurokawa, and he will talk about regulatory capture. Will Japan change? Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, or not invited, but just came because of some like sharing the lesson, and whether do you feel Japan has really changed and try to learn the lesson from Fukushima. There are about 440 nuclear plants in operation. Some are on the rest in the world. About 70 to 80 are under construction. And what do you think? There may be a need of this thing, but I think from 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl will be 30 years in next month, and then Fukushima. Are we really learning things? And Japanese government are willing and try to learn and share the lessons from Fukushima with the rest of the world? And that's my question. And what do you think? So that's my question, because you are journalists. So what do you like to communicate to Japanese public? That's what I did last week in the Japan Press Center, because that is a gathering of journalists, I thought. So that's what it is. So this is a message I think I like to convey, because after 5 years, in my view, I think Japanese are really willing to learn the lesson and sharing the lessons with the rest of the world under the condition of this about 500 nuclear plants. And also they are willing to share the lessons and how to identify and make sort of handle this debris and also contaminated water things. So that is the thing. Attitudes are more like openness and sharing and transparency and the sense of accountability. That's my message in the original report. So I'd like to go over with you this thing. And first, like now, many sort of kind of black swan events have been happening in this century, particularly in this 9/11. Really, that is visible throughout the world in the flat panel TV with color alive. That's 9/11. Now, 2008, this is August 15, was just the beginning of Lehman shock. Everybody suffered from this thing, because Japanese bubble burst was Japanese public suffered, but not the rest of the world that much. But the Lehman, that's a part of globalization. And this 2010, 12, 18, December 18th, what is it? That's the beginning of Arab Spring, which is just 3 months ahead of this Tohoku and also Fukushima accident. After that Arab Spring, northern part of Africa was completely wiped out, and Middle East, now many immigrants coming to Europe, and that's only 5 years ago, right? Just only 3 months difference from Tohoku disaster. Japan is really changing in this kind of change in globalization. That's my question. And then 3/11 happened, And the 311, I think 1 year ago, this 311, what came into the marketplace, which really changed a lot of behavior. That's iPad. That is March 2010. 1 month later, this came to Japan too. That's iPad. And then what is this? November 13th, Friday, that's a French massacre by sort of terrorist attack. So world is changing very rapidly. So globalization, world become interconnected, interdependent, but all of a sudden become fragmented and very fragile. So then happened, this is a natural disaster of great magnitude. That's really a disaster. One earthquake of magnitude once in every century, and tsunami of once in millennia in Japan. But Japan is an earthquake-prone nation, island nation. Magnitude 5 or greater, magnitude of 5 or greater earthquake. But in the world, 20% happens around this area. And this is Fukushima. So tsunami hit and earthquake hit, and then everybody watched in the world, live. So now, Independent Investigation Commission of Fukushima nuclear accident, the national diet was, a law was passed in September, and then this commission started in December the 8th, 70th year of Pearl Harbor, the same date. So I made a comment in that when we had a mission in dietary panel, that was videotaped. You can see that. And excerpt was there, and I made this comment. And this is the 70th year of Pearl Harbor. And there's a special documentary every summer around that time. And there's sort of commentary of the Fukushima and others, Pacific War survivors. And many comments are just, I knew that, but I couldn't have said this or that, and those responsible persons said that. But in Fukushima accident, same commentary comes out in NHK special. That was third special from that time. And I think I made a comment specifically. And the Japanese public may feel, oh, the commentary is quite same. I knew that, but I couldn't have said it, or this is some sort of ambient thing. So that's on the record again. And this was the first time in democratic constitutional Japan. That's another comment I made, because that means really Japanese democracy is functioning. 3 branches of government, administrative arm, legislative arm, judiciary arm, they have to function independently to suppress each other's power. But even Supreme Court says power of this voting of greater than 2, still okay. Why is it? If they say it's against the Constitution by the judgment of the judiciary arm, legislative arm have to do that, something. And that process could be commissioned by independent commission like this. So the fact this is the first time in the historical, like democratic constitutional Japan, raise a question whether Japanese democracy functions well. That was my question. So I just wrote a story of how I get involved with this process. Now what we did is 20 commission meetings with 38 key people and 900 hours of hearing with more than 1,000 people. And then 9 nuclear power plants visits, 3 overseas visits, and evacuees survey, and on-site workers survey, and town meetings, over 400 attendees. But most important element is all commission meeting, broadcasted live and also Nikonama, and online with simultaneous English translation, except first one, because we are not prepared. And so you can see that online anytime you like with English translation. So you can see our responses and dialogue with eyewitness, because we are not professional prosecutors, so we don't know how to do that. But at least you can judge yourself how the elite of Japanese become very forgetful of many key inquiries. So that's always I say that you to judge, not only Japanese, but the world community. And also I think that we had about 30 to 45 minutes press briefing after each session, That also you can see that, and how the sort of press or journalist question are also viewed by the world audience. So you can judge how the journalists question such an incident. And there are a few questions. What do you think? What is the comment of the chairman? Just they asked me that question a few times. My answer is always, I made all the session open to you, so why don't you write what you think? Don't ask me. So the core message of this commission was the regulatory capture and how we organize this team and how we organize this process. I think we had to learn a lot of things. So that's the reason I decided to write this after 5 years, because if this kind of thing happens again, even any process of important matter for the Japanese government or public, I think we suggested at least utilize this kind of system of independent commission under the law. So the core message is regulatory capture. And regulatory capture happens anywhere in the world. But one question was, are there any particular thing unique to Japan which may conducive to regulatory capture in this kind? And of course, we said there are 9 electric utility companies in Japan, and 1 in Okinawa, that's the 10th one. But I think each district regional distribution and electric production is monopolized by electric company. So that's really conducive to any sort of regulatory capture, because monopoly always makes something happen at the end. But I think David Pilling, perhaps one of your friends, I think he was FT's Tokyo Bureau chief. Now he's chief of FT's Asia Pacific. Now he moved to Hong Kong. He likes Japan, like many of you. And so he just really interviewed and studied many things while he was in Tokyo. And he wrote a book in 1914, Bending Adversity, the Japan and the Art of Survival, how Japan becomes sort of a successful country after Meiji Revolution and after the World War II. And he has a lot of interviews with many people, but after that, he moved to Hong Kong in 2008, after 7 years in Tokyo. And then Fukushima happens, and the Tohoku disaster happens, so he came back and quite often. And then his chapter 1 started with this one pine tree in this Rikuzen Takada. But it so happened, chapter 14 covers Fukushima accident. That goes around our report, and also FT op-ed by Gerald Curtis, which said our report message is not accusing anyone, and made in Japan. And that's based on Japanese culture. So that means we are not accusing anyone, so which is the thing. Now that comes back to you again. I made a specific comment at the opening, which is on the record. This is quite similar to what Pacific War survivors comment. And I made a comment at that time. I like to think about why sort of those who are responsible in that time have not said things you had to say, and similar with Fukushima. So, but he said in this thing, accident exposed in a flash, quite literally, the worst trait of all Japan with the elitist and secretive bureaucratic culture. And obviously, to write this book about Japan, he met many Japanese and interviewed many. But when I read this thing, apparently he never interviewed me. So I sent him an email, when you come to Japan again? And then 1 month later, he came to my office, and it seems to me I'm the only one you never interviewed, but to sort of write about this thing. And that's a sort of exchange some ideas, and that's a sort of laughing, that's joking. But that's what this is. He's a very capable person, great reading. Now, in my view, I think this. I don't know how you think about it. In my view, Japan's sort of society at large is created by sort of built and under the sort of order by the structure. For example, like engineer of Toshiba would move to Hitachi during their career, or Mitsubishi Bankman go to Sumitomo? Why it's not allowed or not really just doesn't happen? That has been always my question. Not particularly at this time, because if you follow my blog, always I'm making this, somehow Japan is a bit strange. And once this structure is there, even engineers, bankers, they are not allowed to move. No, you can move, but I think then somehow you are sort of alienated by that community or establishment. Why is it? I don't know why this is, but I get back to you. And so that once you belong to something fresh out of college, each ministry, you stay in that ministry, and for the rest of your career, that's a mindset shared by majority of Japanese. And even private sector too, even banking sector too, even academic, more or less. Why is it? That a mindset is very unique to Japan, isn't it? If you can tell me some other country who does this very rigid way, so the top of this each ministry is when they enter the ministry, and what is the sort of seniority base. I don't know how they do that. Even many major companies too. That's, I think, recent incidents also because of globalization. Olympus happens. I don't know, just you invited this Bob or whoever happened in Olympus people. How about Toshiba? So that is sort of highlight in many sort of non-Japanese press. Oh, this is the same with 4 years ago, like Olympus. But Japanese press do not cover that way. Why is it? Because theirs is the same crowd, perhaps. Asahi Shimbun moved to Yomiuri Shimbun. So they are journalists. That's my question in press. So mindset of Japanese are groupthink tend to be because they belong to that sort of organization. The rest of your time, not as a professional in that community as your skill set. And so that lack of transparency and openness, because if you do that, maybe you may be demoted or something may happen, maybe disadvantage to you. So that may be the reason there's a sort of culture of discouraging to make sort of obligation to dissent. Because a lively discussion to make decision-making thing, but sort of that's a natural trait of Japan, which lead to the accountability, because transparency, openness, if you raise a voice to do that, maybe you may be just may not be demoted, but may not be encouraging you to go up the ladder. So that's the core message. What is accountability by the way, in your mind? How accountability translated into Japanese? What do you think? Because many of you spend many years in Japanese, so many times you have learned Japanese press, they say, お説明責任です. So this is translated into English, responsibility to explain. Is that what you think? What is the meaning of accountability? This is a responsibility to execute what you are supposed to do. So that's the reason there's an outside board and other thing. But so this is a typical lost in translation. I just have a sort of citation in my book. And in fact, 2 years ago, I was invited to risk disaster preparedness by allied forces or something. So just I was invited to National Academy of Science and to give one of the speech, a presentation because of Fukushima thing. And then I have a PowerPoint at that time. You can see that in National Academy of Science, nas.edu. So if you just search my name of Fukushima, and then you can see that on the video, live on video. And when I say this, accountability is translated in Japanese, responsibility to explain. And there's a sort of sounds of, wow, that was very sort of impressive. And this is at least typical lost in translation. And why accountability becomes 説明責任? Just I had a very academic book written by Professor Yamamoto, also 3 years ago. So just I have listed this thing too. That is the sort of underlying thing of the Fukushima accident and also regulatory capture. So the Richard Samuels, perhaps you know, when he comes quite often, he is a sort of Japanese political sort of, he's that academics, MIT professor in Japanese politics, and he is very fluent in both Japanese and Japanese reading. And he wrote a book in 2013. The title of this book, I quoted in this book too, Disaster, no, 3/11. And subtitle is Disaster and Change in Japan. And it seems to him there's not much sign of political sort of maneuvering and also democratic system in Japan even after Fukushima. So what kind of disaster really has to hit Japan to show any sign of change? So that's his conclusion. And GAO USA, you know that Government Accountability Office. GAO used to be Japanese Accounting Office, name of GAO. But they changed the name to Government Accountability Office in 2004 with a subset of this signal saying accountability is a core of governance. So that Government Accounting Office is just there, this is under the Congress. And they have about more than 1,000 staff, and they just review many government, not only accounting, policy, output, and outcome, and makes many recommendations, and about 80% of recommendations have been implemented by administrative arm within 5 years. The high quality research. But that's also reported, a report on Fukushima thing, and how to make nuclear sort of operations safer. And this, again, the accountability is coming to the thing, and transparency. And IAEA, following this GAO's recommendation, they have a first time in the history of IAEA has a 3-day workshop of safety culture and national culture. Because even they make a recommendation, certain national culture may prevent the implementation of this recommendation to make nuclear safer. But in fact, that exactly happened in Japan. Because I met, after this thing, I met many ex-IAEA executives, and they said Japan is not implementing defense in depth, like severe accident, how to evacuate public was not implemented. So we asked Japanese officials, why are you not doing this? And their answer was, yeah, we knew that, but somehow severe accident doesn't happen. So they are puzzled about this thing. So everybody knew that. And they have the first workshop of safety culture and national culture thing. And that's the first time such a workshop was held by IAEA. Of course, I was not notified, and some attendants asked Japanese delegates, 3 of them, why Kurokawa-san was not invited, and they are just frozen. So everybody knows that now. And National Academy of USA also had commissioned 2 years independent commission of what we can learn from Fukushima accident. That started in August of 2012. That means 1 month after we delivered that report. And chairman was Norman Newreiter, first chief science advisor to the State Department, and we have been friends, so he sent me an email right away. Oh, your report, great. Just that like you, straight and clear. And he started this thing 1 month later. After 2 years, our first session, the third session came to Japan. They went to Fukushima, so I was invited with TEPCO just to make a presentation at institution I work, GRIPS. So everybody knew that. That's a transparency. And then David Pilling book I showed it to you. So the lesson learned from Nike, our report, was one is apparent cause was insufficient defense in depth. We knew that. So severe accidents are not supposed to happen in Japan. So they are not practicing and not practicing as a theoriness, and also lack of systematic knowledge and management transfer, and lack of safety consciousness. Even after 9/11, US government, I think, had a twice briefing with Japanese government of this B5B, because a nuclear plant is a good target of a sort of terrorist attack, so that how to prepare this, and sort of a multiple of electric source of all the things, but I think Japan didn't do anything at even that. So that has been reported after this. There are many reports and many books written on Fukushima saying Funabashi-san and many things, so I think everybody knows that. Regulatory and academic capture. press also captured. But root cause was lack of learning and questioning attitude in Japan. Because of that, maybe institutional structure or not, I'm not so sure, but that's up to your interpretation. Poorly developed safety culture, complacent and mindset, and closed monocultural community that tend to lead groupthink. Responsibility of Japan in the world, active, open-minded, bi and multilateral communication with international partners in such a thing like nuclear plants. Lesson learned, why not share? Why try to invite any comments? And try to learn from outside experts, decommissioning process, why you're not inviting everybody in a very transparent way? In fact, this contaminated water, METI created one institution, IREAD, and they just ask for open competition, not open advices and proposal for this sort of decontamination, this water thing. And there are about 750 sort of proposal came, and about 200 was from abroad, because I called the head of energy agency, and 200 was from abroad. That's great. But do you know this list, what kind of idea proposed? And how to make this proposal useful and the process of this sort of water, contaminated water thing. But all of a sudden, they announced we're going to freeze the land thing. And I think there are many, so make more transparency of this proposals, how to develop most cost-effective and technology available, and cost effectiveness and economy, and I think nobody knows. Why is that? Why we don't share? If something happens, I think we could share that. Contaminated water, new nuclear safety agency, it's supposed to be independent, and I think Tanaka-san must be working very hard. They have a 500 plus staff, which is many sort of belongs to former sort of each ministry, which they are stuck, and other matters. Future perspective reflecting Fukushima nuclear accident, sharing with the world. And Japan viewed from the world, as you know, is positive thing, is stable business operation, hard-working engineers, well-trained operators, skillful technicians, well-informed public, well-informed, I'm not so sure, but I think that's Japanese perception. And negative is unclear decision-making process, and isolated close from international community even now, and governance, strong loyalty, weak leadership, lack of sense of accountability, and in fact there are many books, I think perhaps you share that, unique mindset of Japanese and in culture, like Ruth Benedict or the Chrysanthemum and the Sword 1948. Her last chapter really pointed out that sort of unique sort of value and also mindset of Japanese, made certain recommendation. Nakane Chie-san, Japanese Society, 1969 in Japanese, but it's in English version, 1972. And her, another pair report of Japan and the dynamics of vertical society, 1978, in Japanese only. But that's a very good book. And she's the only National Academy member, or women member of 180 National Academy. But Carl Wolfram, you know that, your friend, enemy of Japanese power, 1990, he pointed out this thing. Samuel Huntington, Clash of Civilizations and Remaking World Order, 1996, making out Japan is very unique. And that may be a sort of weakness of Japan, too, in this global world. He made that comment. Ivan Fall, perhaps you know this thing, The Culture of the Mind, Japan's Intellectual Closed Shop, 1997. Yeiko Ikegami, this is a great book too, The Taming of the Samurai and the Bond of Civility. And this is a very heavy book. I think one is Harvard University Press, and another one was Cambridge University Press. John Dower's Embracing Defeat, everybody knows that. And Richard Samuels, I told you this thing. David Pilling, Bending Adversity, Japan and the Art of Survival. And most recently, Japanese version, translation version just came in January this year. January a year ago, 2015. Taggart Murphy, he's now a teacher at Tsukuba University. Japan and the Shackle of the Past. Some Japanese mind are built during Edo time. So even the Japanese incorporated many structure of governance and university and society, and sort of they incorporated only the format of this system but mindset is still remain as Edo era. So this is my presentation, and I like to share with you. Still, that kind of mindset change or not, I'm not certain. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one reminder, if you have your phones, if you could put it on manner mode. I forgot to introduce myself, James Sims, member of PAC and member of the board. We'd like to go to questions from the working press, and if you could state your name and affiliation, and I guess keep it to one first. If we have more time, we can go for a second round. No?
Thank you very much, Kurokawa-sensei. I'd like to ask you about yesterday's court decision on Kansai Electric reactors. Is it the case, how do you interpret it? Do you think the courts are now starting to take action because of the fact that Japan is still caught up in regulatory capture, or at least the industry and its regulator are? Could you address that, please? Thank you.
Well, I don't know how you see that, because I think that's a map up to, because I'm not the expert on this nuclear thing, but I think, how about captured part of this Japanese press and journalists? That's my expectation. So even this press center last week, I said, don't ask me, just you do what you do. You have to think what you have to do to the society as a journalist. No? That's my attitude. Why I have to say it? That's my view. That's sort of my what I say to the sort of thing to particularly journalist.
Well, I'm a journalist asking you.
You know, I know. So you are non-Japanese thing, more independent. That's what I'm saying.
Do you want to follow up, or?
Because I think at least I think sort of the judiciary arm is functioning at least. I don't know how you value and sort of share that kind of thing. What that means to the Japanese public, that is the thing. But Japanese public, to understand this meaning, journalism and also academic community really have to respond one way or another as an individual. Yeah.
Sure. Do you need to clarify? If you could come up to the mic.
Sorry.
Okay, I take your point. You're not a judicial expert. But you certainly must have developed some expertise on Japan's regulatory structure in the very detailed report you did 5 years ago, and I attended many of your hearings.
So I think that in my view, this is a sign of this democracy is functioning. Right or not is a different thing.
But could I just ask you the more simple question then, just to clarify from your presentation, do you think the industry, the utilities, and the unfortunately acronymed NRA still suffer from some of the issues you talked about that caused the Fukushima disaster?
No,
Can you give me a direct answer on that?
Okay. I wrote in this thing also, I just went to see Tanaka-san twice, but Tanaka-san's commission seems to be independent under the law, but 900 plus his staff belongs to each ministry. So that was another sort of recommendation in this commission, that has to be no return rule should apply. But they wouldn't follow my recommendation. They just, for their convenience, that's what they do.
So the no return rule is basically if you're seconded from, say, the Trade and Industry Ministry, you can't go back. So you're not worried about, what your other people at the ministry who are promoting nuclear power, if you do something against, their interests or what they're trying to do, that it might affect your career. So
again, stay there in the structure.
Okay. Anyway, I'd like to continue with questions from the working press. If not, I actually had one question, which is always, and I think maybe you might address this in the book. It was the difference between the English and the Japanese version.
Yeah.
Because the English version was actually quite critical. It talked about made in Japan and a man-made disaster, whereas the Japanese version was not as, I think, direct And so I'm just wondering about the difference between the two, the translation as well as the original Japanese.
Okay, I think I wrote this thing too. Just why don't you buy it and read it, because that's my recommendation. But if I have to answer, I think this two executive summary, we are certain we had to develop English version one way or another, because I think press and everything was open to any journalist, so that English version, we didn't have time, so just we had a special English version team at that time, and full text had been online in October. Took 3 months to do that, because that's more like actually follow what we write in entire text and my sort of preface, because lack of time, this is a sort of global audience, so that we just did that. That's the reason this is a chairman's message, because that's my personal message. And also the content of this executive summary in English is completely different from Japanese version. Because Japanese version is just a combination of certain things, even this law and other things. But the English version, it's irrelevant, so just completely different. So if you read the content, that's completely different. So that first you have to see that. And then I summarize a message, which is consistent with my personal view, if you follow my blog, and also just my personal message like this. So make it a very precise, concrete thing for many to understand Japan. So this kind of thing. So in a narrative, maybe a bit strong and sort of succinct. But Japanese tend to be not succinct. That's another sort of Japanese thing. That's the reason when you give some keynote speech like Abe-san and high shot, and I think even when I was serving as a Fukuda-san as a sort of chief science advisor, he had to give a 30-minute talk at the World Economic Forum. So just I was working with him, but I suggested at the end, why don't you make this in English first, and then send it to the translator, and just translate back to Japanese, or why don't you read it? That would be a much better way to communicate. For example, in Japanese, when you start talking about something and you see the ambience, and at the end you can say, とは思いません, or 思います. So I do think or I do not think it come at the end, because that you're reading the ambience of your sort of audience response. So if you say this thing, in the simultaneous translation, always other language, usually I do not think or I believe or this, it comes first, and then you listen. But in Japanese, that comes at the end. So I think for translation, it must be very hard, in my view.
Okay, would like to continue with questions. No.
Gregory Clark, freelance. I spent 3 years on the Nuclear Safety Commission
Yeah, right. I know that.
before Fukushima.
Yes.
I've also written a book about the uniqueness of the Japanese
Yes.
thinking. Nobody's bothered to come and ask me what actually happened on that commission.
Right.
I was the only foreigner on it. I saw some very interesting and important things. May I suggest that everybody, both before Fukushima and after,
Yeah,
are slaves of their preconceived thinking and mindsets.
right. Maybe I...
There are specific reasons for this, for what happened, but I have not seen any commentary which comes close to giving those reasons.
So is that a question or?
No comment. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that's another reason I think after this accident, TEPCO invited, I think, Richard Meserve, and also I think Lady Judge and a few other known sort of Japanese as advisory for this TEPCO's thing. And they asked me, are they really serious to listen to us? That's what it is. That's a formality. And their decision is just for convenience. And why private sector just always ask advices from ministry or government? I don't get it. Mind your own business. That's what it is. It's a globalization. So if you don't want to do that, don't go to public company. privatize. That's a different issue. Thank you, Gregory-san. Clark-san.
Okay, just any other
should,
questions from the working press? Okay, over here, and then we'll come back to you.
Siegfried Knittel, writing for Austrian newspaper, The Standard. Some years ago, we talked with a German scientist, some German journalists talked with a German scientist about security in the power plant. And he said he feels there is in Japan a kind of a lack of perception in thinking. Not to imagine what can happen. A kind of a wait and see mentality.
Right.
Would you support and is this would this kind, if you talk about culture, is this kind of a cultural thing, not to be weak in perception and wait and see what I think will come?
I don't know. That's the reason I says a lack of a sense of accountability. Why is it? Why private sector ask government advice all the time? Why is it? Why outside board is not really just functioning in your view? How about the insurance company? They are functioning? That's my view. In the now EU, I heard they are now under the law, they try to just implement the law that every accounting firm, each 10 years, they have to invite a different one. They are forced to change accounting firm. That may become a part of this sort of collusion. And I think Japanese, I'm not so sure. Even reinsurance. So that's again made in Japan too, somehow. So I'm I'm sort of suggesting, that's a personal thing. Why don't we invite the reinsurance company and insurance company non-Japanese? Why not? That's another way to have a better governance.
Me again, and I didn't introduce myself. I'm a working journalist at Reuters. Can I ask can I go back in history? When you were doing the inquiry into the disaster,
Yeah.
was there any occasion when TEPCO refused to pass documents to you or give you access to
Right.
documents? The reason I ask is because TBS Tokyo has just reported that in 2008, I think it was, TEPCO actually simulated a tsunami wave at 15 meters
right.
hitting F1. But were there any cases where TEPCO refused you access to documents or people?
Yeah. In fact, I think that's a part of our report. I think we stated that thing. And in fact, we asked TEPCO to submit certain document and this and that. According to this law, they can refuse it. But I think since we made this order commission open, so next time, they refuse it, we can say that to you guys. And also we can just ask diets, like national diets, to just do something because they refuse. So they are not refusing, and they submitted many documents, but we have to really put them in a very secure place, of course. And that is the reason I think they allow us to see the video and in their office. So that they may be listening to us. I mean, that's all right, but from 9 to 5. So I went to see that particular video, and I saw that when Prime Minister Khan went to TEPCO, that part was silenced somehow. And then when I went to Fukushima Daini, I think all the TEPCO thing was, all the video was there at Daini too, and all that was also not, no voice. So I asked them, why is there no voice? And I think they are prepared for us inquiry. So somehow, how this goes through something, that's a strange thing. So we said that. Then I think journalists and many people, if they write it, and then they sort of judiciary might move. And why they don't capture all the evidence on TEPCO? Still not yet. Why is it? That's my question. So make all the commission meeting and press briefing open is a very effective way, but how they respond is a different thing.
I guess a follow-up to that, my question is, why isn't everything open? especially since TEPCO is basically nationalized, shouldn't like all the emails, all the video, all
Right.
the documents, there
Yeah.
should be nothing hidden. I mean, it should all be open for, you know, journalists and everybody to actually go through.
Right.
And a lot of it is still not disclosed.
Right. In fact, I think this is the first time in this democratic Japanese society, and this is the first time so that lawmaker forgot to make the sort of how many years we can just say this. So I think this is also government inquiry headed by Hatamura-san was the same, because I think to interview all the thing, I mean, it's very difficult to say just we may sort of open this thing. It may be hard to do that, but I think public voice raised, and this all of a sudden Yoshida testimony, all the session become available. So I think that's a sort of public voice have to be raised and typical the thing. So that's my message. Otherwise, I cannot say that. Because also legislative policymakers forgot to put, you know, what is the year we could disclose this or that. Because that's
Oh, you mean for the testimony to be
Yeah, for
disclosed
opposite,
publicly?
right.
Right. Okay. So, anyway, I'd like to continue. Go ahead.
it's written this too, in this book too.
Hello again, Joël Legendre from French TV and Radio, RTL, BFM TV. I attended, like Aaron, these meetings 5 years ago, and
Yeah.
I remember at that time we had some questions about the capability of the parliament people to understand what nuclear industry is. Right. And after all, it's, I mean, today, not only in Japan, a nuclear thing, the whole point is to control the flow of information, as we just asked right now. So my point is, would you see that there are some elements in your report, in the commission, in the investigation? Do you see that there are reports that were maybe missing content? Do you think that they have really understood the nature of what nuclear energy is? And don't you think that 5 years after we are still doubting about what had really happened in the accident? You make it as a mindset problem, but isn't it also because of the nature of nuclear industry, which is extremely complicated to understand, and that's why people still have fear today, where maybe they are less fear than 5 years ago?
I don't know how to respond to that. Because I think after this accident, apparently cost of nuclear plant operation and also protection, safety become much more expensive. So whether economically viable or not, I'm not so sure. And also from many accidents and also potential risks, so that even French, I think nuclear plant operation is very open to sort of public and the regional public too, and make any decision. And so that when I visited France after this thing, and the EDF, and also one of the president of the French, Laurent Stricker, so that they invited me, and also that they invited me to this Nuclear Radiation Safety Research Institute. And I wrote in this blog when I went there, and there's a flag of France, French flag, and the EU and Japan. So I asked them, why Japan? And that's because of me. That's a great thing. So I think at least more open discussion and transparency is a thing. So even French, I think nuclear is protected by its military, and they do a lot of exercise with the regional residents, and they are not, there's no scenario. And usually annual sort of exercise is maybe 3 or 4 person in the operation is sort of making scenario. Nobody knows. All of a sudden that day he announced it, and everybody just really practice. And Japan is a formality. Everything is there, and Prime Minister was there. And this I thought when I was awarded, I wrote this in book, awarded AAAS, which published Science, that journal. And they gave me a Scientific Freedom and Responsibility Award. So when I went there for award ceremony, I had to make a comment. And I think this is just like kabuki. This is kabuki. But kabuki is a really refined art form, but if this is governance and operations kabuki, this is not a good way to do that.
I'm Terry Jimbo with the Video News. Since we don't have an interpreter today, I'm going to ask questions in English. I know your commission didn't look into the effect of radiation exposure after the accident, but since you're the medical doctor, I'm tempted to ask this question. There seemed to be apparent reluctance on the government part to acknowledge that there's a link between the exposure, radiation exposure, and the increase, if not outbreak, of the thyroid cancer in Fukushima. And from your experience as a commission head and also a medical doctor, does it have anything to do with your theme in this book, this regulation capture? Why is government always slow to acknowledge such a thing? I think we experienced similar situation in Minamata as well. And there are many data that backs up that there is apparent increase there. But we had a doctor from Fukushima Prefectural University this week, and he just maintains that he doesn't believe, or there's no clear evidence that they are linked. And therefore, the countermeasure is, I think, being delayed as a result. Yeah.
I guess I think first we didn't have enough time to do that, but I think they do all the echo and many of children in Fukushima and the evacuees, and I think they found certain incidents of some mass or this, but this again it may take time because low radiation thing, and I don't know what to say, because I think this many long-term follow-up of radiation impact is being done by ABCC, Hiroshima A-bomb, and this is a sort of American military follow-up, so maybe a long follow-up. And why, and Chernobyl, do we know any sort of follow-up of this thing? And I think Fukushima, Japan is reasonably advanced country in science and technology. So my question is why Japanese government, I think, try to do this follow-up, long-term follow-up of certain protocol by international team? That's my question. Why everything has to be done in Japan by Japanese? That's the attitude of Japan. And why is it? So openness and transparency. And in my view, this is a personal view, at least the Japanese government should fund certain long-term follow-up of this Fukushima exposure and radiation, because it may take time to have certain thing, control, whatever have you, so that in the international team. So that has to be a more sort of accountability and leadership of Japanese government to initiate a long-term follow-up with not only Japanese, because some of the academics are also captured, but I'm not so sure. But it's better to have an international expert team. And in fact, Harvard School of Public Health created a new center of radiation science, and they asked me to become an inaugural international advisory committee. So just I made a comment on this thing, and how about the data of this low radiation exposure in this, what was that, uranium thing in this? Yeah?
Tritium in the water?
Not a tritium, but also low radiation and impact. Maybe U.S. military may have a lot of things, and deteriorated uranium bread in Iraqi, and also A-bomb, and even this.
Depleted uranium rounds.
Yeah, something like that, and I think that may be a sort of a more military secret. But at least we should do a long-term follow-up of this low radiation exposure, and U.S. has a better source of having this thing. But I think Japanese government at least should encourage to international sort of long-term follow-up of radiation. In my view, that's my proposal.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Uesugi-san.
久しぶり。
高橋上杉フリーランス Working for No Border 日本語でいきます。黒川委員長が国会事故調終了直後の最後の会見だと思うんですが、今回の事故調のことに関して国会に呼ばれたら参考人でも証人喚問でも出ていく準備があるというふうにおっしゃっていましたが、その後政府からアプローチがありましたかというのが1点と、あと最近ここ5年経ってですね、東電が2月24日にメルトダウンの判定、これをようやく認めるというようなことからいろんなことが出てきました。当時事故調は国会事故調のほか3つ、政府事故調、東電事故調、民間事故調ありましたが、他の事故調と違って国会事故調だけが電源喪失に関しては津波ではなくて 地震によって起こされた可能性があると、条件付きで、付していましたけど、そのことに関して、今現在他の事故調の報告と比べて、どのように委員長自体を思っているか、お聞かせください。ジェームスさんが。
Well, actually, the two questions simply. One is Kurokawa-san said that he was ready to testify in Parliament if they called him regarding the report, and I think he was wondering what had happened after that. And the other question was regarding the diet report, which actually spent, I can't remember, 1/6 or 1/5 of it on potential impacts from the earthquake on the plant. And so he was wondering, if there was any follow-up, because the other reports did not talk about the earthquake impact as much, and obviously the TEPCO report had maybe, I think, one line.
Okay. One of our recommendations, we made a specific 7 recommendation to the diet, right? Not the administrative arm, because our sponsor was National Diet, legislative arm, to create a sort of standing committee addressing nuclear thing in the both houses of National Diet, and they created it. And we are invited by House of Representatives once, like all the 9 commissioners, because one was Oshima-san was already a member of Nuclear Safety Agency, so he was not invited. But I think we have spent several hours, and that's on the record too. And we also write this story, and upper house, House of Councillors, has created such a inkai, such a committee, but never invited us because they don't know what to ask. Personally, they ask me what kind of thing we should ask. So that is the level of sort of awareness and your elected public officials. Now, of course, administrators are more careful. They are reading as an institution, everything. And they have done that certain things, and they are very clever. And in fact, they made they had a special investigation of certain points we sort of pointed out, and which they thought they are accountable, so they did that. And after 2 years, they did a 2 years investigation of this effect of earthquake, and there's some leak of this water in plant number 1, but we couldn't find anything, so that they have a report. So, and they just ask me and us, can you sort of review it if there's any comment? So we submitted a report to them in writing to Safety Agency and Safety Kiseicho, which is a sort of civil servant, most of them. And have you just consulted the National Diet? Because we are independent person, just we have no right to do that. And then they didn't respond to that. And they say, if as a private person, can you do it? And so we never responded to that. And they went to Kiseicho's report, went to Kisei Inkai, NSA, and they approved it. Just they didn't explain what we said. And also we showed this to both House of Chairman. Yes, we requested this kind of thing. You approve it or not? And they didn't do anything because that time Abe-san was making a new cabinet. That was time. So I think this both sort of changed, like Mori-san and also Sangi. So we are just waiting. And then all of a sudden after that, they just presented this to Jiminto's project team and approved. So this is submitted to IAEA. So we wrote this story too. So they don't understand what this means. So the process. Now, earthquake issue. So they studied it. So I wrote also, if they studied it, why don't you invite Tanaka-san, all the guys who claim there must be something? So that's a way to do this wisdom of how you do it. And that's crazy. So that's my view. So I write about it. So I told them, why don't you invite those who are claiming there must be something? So the mindset is everything is just done by us. That's the strange Japanese psyche of Edo Jidai. And also earthquake thing, I think we have no direct evidence, but suggestive evidence from some sort of hearing from workers at that time, and video thing, and particularly plant number 1 was sort of some potential. And so that, because we did that, and our response was, Japan is an earthquake-prone country. So at least this is a reasonable for government and also utility company to study, are they really, this may be a weak point of this or that. I think that's a sort of matter of accountability of Japan, because we suggested the possibility of this earthquake had a blackout already in number 1 plant, so that why don't you just check every plant? So that's a sort of recommendation. So there's no evidence for that in Fukushima Daiichi. It doesn't mean you are okay, because at least earthquake should be prepared for this thing. And this is a portion, and that is the reason, at least Japan is earthquake-prone country. That's the reason it's prudent for Japanese government to check this thing. And many more open ways. So even I suggested Tanaka-san, why don't you just go to the site visit of this, and why don't you invite many international experts with you guys? That's my recommendation, but I think maybe his staff may oppose to that. I don't know.
I think Mr. Tanaka did want to visit the number 1 reactor, but the TEPCO said that the radiation levels were too high, but then later said that there was some sort of miscommunication.
Right. So I asked Tanaka-san just how much sort of radioactivity according to this press, how many minutes you can be there. He said 10 minutes. But then, so just that reason I asked TEPCO to allow them to go. And then too dark, it's dangerous, but that turned out to be wrong. So I wrote this thing too.
Joel, and then we'll come back. Well, we have a few minutes probably for another 1 or 2 questions.
Just 3 former leaders of TEPCO have been inducted. I would like to hear your comment on that, if it's possible, what you have to say about that, and what do you think will happen?
Leaders of TEPCO?
Yeah.
In our commission?
No. No. The 3 ex-leaders of TEPCO who have been, who are going to be prosecuted.
I don't know. I have no comment on that. I have nothing to judge. That may be a kabuki theater. I don't know.
Karine Nishimura, Agence France Presse, French agency. I have only one question. In 5 years, do you think that at least something had changed in the Japanese society? And in this case, what had changed?
I don't know. How do you see that? Because that is the thing. Even Richard Samuels writes, after this disaster, there's no sign of sign of change in legislative arm and also democracy in Japan. So what kind of disaster Japan needs to change? That's his conclusion. So in fact, UPenn, I think last November, invited, I think, how the major disaster and compensation thing, and this Fukushima was one thing, and Sichuan earthquake in China, and 30 years ago, this Bhopal in India with Union Carbide thing. These 3, we discussed this thing, and just we submitted a manuscript, and Richard Samuels and I was on Fukushima. We discussed that.
So just after the accident, were you expected something to change because of this accident?
Well, I'm not so sure, because I have been saying this even before this thing. And if you read this, I was 1 week after this, what I did after Fukushima thing, I wrote the introduction. I was following Twitter intensively because of this is only 3 months after Arab Spring. So I was in this Cartagena 1 week before that accident, Arab Spring happened, so that I was following what's happening in Arab, because I was also board of trustee in Alexandria Library prior to that, so just I was wondering what's really happening. And then all of a sudden Fukushima happened, so just I followed Mother's speakers, and particularly like non-Japanese journalist, who does a lot of Twitters, and what's happening outside, and how the non-Japanese journalists and the media see that Japanese response. And then I went to Prime Minister's office in 19th or something. I like 1 week later, submitted 4-page paper. I think you should do that. And I think I really strongly suggested to consider creation of independent international task force to investigate this thing. And so just I wrote this story too.
Okay, lady over here, and then we'll come back to you. She hasn't asked a question yet, so.
Maria Muguchi with the AP. I just want to follow up Joel's question about the 3 former TEPCO executives have to go to criminal court. And I wonder, having done all investigation interviews and everything in your team, do you think any more secrets or untold facts would come out during a trial? And I have another simple question. Is there any plan for full translation of the main report? I think there was a plan for an English translation for the full text, not just the executive summary?
No, I think that's full report. Entire text was translated into English.
Oh, okay.
And online in October, 3 months later. So it took 3 extra months to really polish into English version. And I think that you can see online. So NAIC, NAIIC, GOJP, and then that both you go to Japanese version or English version.
Okay.
And the English version you can see also commission meeting and press briefing, everything.
Okay, sorry about that. If you could just give us a very brief explanation of how you selected the translation team and how it worked, if it was very difficult to find people with knowledge.
Well, that's also we have written because we cannot hire somebody whom we do not know, because there may be some spy from TEPCO establishment, so that we rely, because we started with nobody on our team, right? So we had to, first thing I had to identify who could be a project manager of this thing. And I could think of only few people in Japan who has a skill set of project manager of this kind, and with independent thinker and independent value, which is consistent with my values. That means why tatewari gyosei. So I then think about Uda-san and called him. I have been commissioned this thing, and can you help me, because you are sort of McKinsey, ex-McKinsey. I mean, then he was sort of Japan Post devaluation, all the things, and his thing is always anti sort of bureaucratic Kasumiya thing. So I know that. So he has a skill set, and his mindset and the value, core value is quite similar. So I called him, and after 10, 15 minutes, he said, okay, I'll do it. Because I asked me, what are you doing recently? So he was not engaging full-time. It's not good. So full-time person cannot come to us, right? Because many are just establishment. So that every person just have to tag with who introduced this guy. We have to do that. So English version too, I think, have to have not only English translator, but have to have a professional editing capability with such a cheap labor, which is Kokkai, temporarily. I mean, so I think they did a great job, no question. And we have went through this first word-to-word translation, and then went through about 6 sort of revisions, and always reading prior this and that. And that was a lot of work. It took 3 months. You can see that. And we are planning to have this on ebook right now. But Kokkai, this is the first time. So all the Kokkai document, because the ebook, but in the international publishing house. But then I have another problem with Kokkai, because Kokkai, every document is Japanese. And they don't accept any English translated version. And it never happened before. So never happened before. They have a long time to go through something different. So still we are stuck. I'm still trying to do that.
Okay, so this is probably one of the last questions.
Correct, Sensei.
Oh, the 3 prosecutors, the prosecution.
I have no idea. You can see as a journalist how independent Japanese sort of 3 branches of the government may be. I don't know. I have no comment. And this is a test again, right?
Okay. Finally, I will ask the question I was supposed to. My impression, 3 years on the Safety Commission, was intense attention to mechanical detail.
Yeah.
If anything, too intense, because it created the culture of safety, and they didn't look else. Nobody, including yourself, talked about Onagawa.
Mm-hmm.
There was a nuclear plant at Onagawa closer to the earthquake, which came out completely intact. And not only that, provided a refuge for the people in the village
Right.
to go
Went to Onagawa.
to avoid the tsunami and so on.
Right.
But on the contrary, thinking about all the what has caused the problems is the lack of the concept of it's included in this concept of sorte-gai. Sorte-gai.
Right.
The Japanese mind seems then reluctant to, in English we call that contingency planning.
Right.
Now this occurs not only in the nuclear thing, but it occurs in many companies. Yeah. In American companies there is always contingency, and in Japan no. Why, in other words, everybody had allowed for the contingency of this pipe to break or for that pipe to break, but for the electricity supply to be cut.
Right.
Was outside the range of the sortie.
Yeah.
Can you explain? Have you looked into this simple mistake which caused all the problems?
Right, because I think first, I think IAEA just make a recommendation based on major and minor many accidents, right? So I think at least they should follow. But I don't know because I'm not a Fukushima expert, nuclear expert, but I was a medical doctor by training, so I know how to question patients, listen to patients. That's what it is. But now after this thing, I think I found out, many people, IAEA and nuclear people, I think Japan is not following this defense in depth. That is, so I don't know. So there's no concept of what if, even private sector, right? Or what if. And this sorte-gai means I'm telling them lack of imagination. Even 9/11 and B5B, I mean, why you are not listening? Because it doesn't happen in Japan. This is the same with World War II. That's what I'm saying. So that's the reason I put on the record, when we accepted this, I said, this is the 70th year of Pearl Harbor. Why they chose this date, I don't know, but that happened to be so. But so I said, this is why Japanese people think, oh, this is a sort of testimony of survivor of World War II, same thing. Why is it? So I think I want to think about why Japanese majority would think, oh, this is the same. Somehow, same thing happens again. So, but I think what if is not really. And also, as I said, even big corporation, when something happens, why they ask government? Mind your own business. That's what I say. And I think recently in my some speaking engagement, world become global, and I think corporates become global. So when Pfizer want to buy AstraZeneca, that become a lot of political issue because headquarters moved to London, then income tax become less, and even Google is now a sort of national revenue become less and less because Google's sales in the UK is more than $1 billion, but the tax they pay is only a fraction of this thing. So now many countries try to apply a sort of national tax law, but what do you do? So that's a part of globalization. So I say this is the beginning of end of nation states, which is a sort of Westphalia Treaty of this Western Europe. In my view, NGO become global, and leading academic institution become global, and Sophia was an exception in Japan, as was ICU. Still, Japanese academic is still insular. That's what Ivan Hall wrote about this culture of the mind. Very professional, journalist, science, university, law firm, all do not want to invite non-Japanese.
Well, on that note, at the Foreign Correspondents Club, anyway, I would like to thank you again for actually going quite a bit over today and answering actually a wide variety of questions. And we look forward to having you come again at some point to talk about these and other issues. Sure. But as is our usual custom, we would like to give you an honorary membership. Right. And hopefully we will see you at some point in the bar or in the dining room. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you. Oh, これ。 this is English and Japanese, looks similar, right? But if you see the content, completely different. So as first thing is different too. Because so if you see that, oh, this is the same message, not same but different message, but it's more powerful to the for international audience.
So it's different from Japanese version?
Oh, completely different. If you just sort of thickness, like page is like 99 and 86. So that I should have said that on the output, right? That's my mistake. Thank you. これありがとうございました。